Alrighty, time for another lot of PRs, this time for Season 13 of our Natdex draft. So yeah, I'm Truth. Just like all the other PR videos in the past, I'm going to be going through each and every team using one of the prep sheets and taking a look at the pros and cons of each team and then sort of tiering them in some sort of order. For some reason the tier list is extremely scuffed, so some names are massive, some aren't. I'm not really sure what's up with that. Now I've got these names out of order as well, so that's not particularly helpful. But yeah, so looks weird, but it'll get the job done. So yeah, this is just going to be one big long video because we only have one group this time around, no Armrouge and Ceruledge split, and just like the other videos as well. If you want to skip to a certain team that you want to hear about, then there'll be timestamps in the description. And again, this is just one person's opinion looking at a prep doc and imposing some rather arbitrary opinions along the way. So yeah, by all means, someone I say in top 4 could get last place. Someone in last place could very well prove me wrong, and I'm keen to see that happen. So yeah, these tiers are pretty straightforward. Top 4 is what I would expect the teams to be in the top 4. Playoffs, top 8. Dark Horse, a team that I'm not sure if it'll get into playoffs, but it probably has like a lot of maybe more win conditions than other teams, which is why I could maybe see it moving into playoffs or top 4. And then they'll prove me wrong in sort of the teams that I still think are strong, but I'm not sure if they're better than the teams that I'd rate to get into playoffs. These teams are these rankings are entirely based on the teams, so I'm not taking player skill or history into account. So just looking at the teams at face value. And lastly, I also I've only watched like one replay for this season so that I can try to remain as sort of fresh and objective, I guess, when reviewing these teams. Because I know in the past, like, you might get someone who drafts a team that on paper, you might not like the look of, and then all of a sudden they start off the season 4-0 in like the first week, and you're like, okay. So don't really want to let that influence my perspectives. So yeah, we're just going to go in order, starting with DB and James's team, with their first pick, Mega Electros. So this was a controversial first pick. A lot of people were thinking it is rated too low. I think that it's probably overrated a little bit, but I'm keen to see if I'm wrong. There may have already been matches by DB and James. Maybe they've already proven me wrong and I don't even know about it. Yeah, to sort of start off with, they have nice speed tiers. Like, in general, this is a really nice split. I think that maybe having something in like the 110 or 105 range, it's usually not a bad thing to have, but with the inclusion of Holt, you have webs as well. You have guys that can sort of circumvent speed through Grassy Glide or Shift Gear Revavroom, and also Prankster as well. So in terms of speed control, there's actually a lot going on for this team, which is going to make it really difficult to deal with. And I kind of like webs with Electros as well, specifically because there's no sort of combination of EVs that you can utilize so that, what's it called? Elevate. So that Elevate can give a speed boost. That's just not something that can happen, which sort of stunts Electros' progress. So it might get a boost, but you can still easily outspeed it. A lot less easy if there's webs on the field. So I do like that inclusion. There's quite an obvious Dragon Fairy Steel Core, which is nice. Defensively, other than sort of Empoleon, these guys aren't like the greatest defensive backbone, but they're still great typings to have. And then you've also got a lot of starters on this team actually, that form the backbone of a Grass Water Fire Core with Arcanine as well. I think that having both Blastoise and Empoleon might be like a little bit redundant. Obviously Blastoise, I think on this team, you're probably using it more as a bit of a sweeper with Shell Smash, which it's obviously quite good at. But it's a bulky water, along with Empoleon, who's a bulky water, and they both do removal stuff. I think in most matchups you're probably just bringing Empoleon if you want to fill that role. And then if you want to bring sort of offensive Blastoise, it makes it a bit awkward if you also want to bring Empoleon for a certain matchup. Doubling up on the water typings there. They're still kind of similar Pokemon, all in all. But yeah, there's other good inclusions here. Gligar, I think, is quite nice. It allows for the hazards to be set up. Because outside of Gligar, there's probably not too much hazard setting going on. I think it's a little bit detrimental, but I think that DB and James probably don't care as much. Maybe the game plan is more revolving around the webs anyways than like a Spike or a Stealth Rock. And that's all to say that, you know, Gligar's still good at this sort of stuff anyways. So if Gligar comes to a match, it shouldn't have trouble setting up at least one hazard before it gets knocked or hit with an Ice move. Momentum's good. Momentum's actually really good. Lots of options. Honestly, is that the entire team gets Momentum? There's 5 there. That's 7, 9, 10. So what, like literally everyone except for what's its face? Ordino gets Momentum, which is kind of cracked. And that's going to make it really difficult to sort of get control versus DB and James. Ordino's alright as Wish support. I don't really think this team needs like Wish support that much anyways. Like, it's okay for Electros. Like these guys aren't like the bulkiest individuals anyways. Like if you're wishing into Polt or you're wishing into, you know, Rillaboom or into Eel, they definitely appreciate it. But they're not like tanks, like how you might get like, say, just looking to the right here, like a Tinglu. Like wishing into Tinglu is fantastic because it's a tank that can't heal. And for DB and James, like their tanks do heal. So like Ordino heals, Empoleon heals, Blastoise doesn't, so I guess that's fair. But Gligar also heals, so Ordino's not like too necessary, but just kind of nice to have. And then in terms of the type chart, it looks good on paper. I think that some of these like grey matchups are probably worse than they appear on paper, just because only having one rock resist and it's Revavroom, who's, you know, who can be defensive if necessary, but is also very susceptible to Edgequake combinations that most rock types are probably carrying. It's not ideal. And then same with Ghost, like your only Ghost resist being Ordino is fine, but like I said, I don't know how often DB and James are going to want to bring Ordino to games anyways. Like in my mind, this team sort of wants to set up webs, allow for, you know, maybe an SD Rillaboom or a Shift Gear, Revavroom, or, you know, Eel to do something crazy. Maybe some sort of like bulky Dragon Dance Polt that benefits from webs too. I'm not really sure, but I think it's more of an offensive team than a defensive oriented team. So I think if you're forced into bringing Ordino versus some sort of really strong Ghost, could get a little tricky, just from a team building perspective. And then same with the Dark typing as well. I think when you're running an EVO-like Pokemon, you probably want to have a better knockoff switch in than, say, Ribombee. So that's just something to keep in mind as well, that I think that there's a few matchups that this team's going to be quite susceptible versus. All in all, I like the team though. Like I said, there's lots of speed control, there's lots of sort of disruption if Sableye comes to the match especially, and there's a lot of setup potential. Like, you know, it's a team that has, I mean, like even Eel can sweep despite its speed stats, so what you're looking at like 3, you know, QD Rubombee's a thing as well, like 4, 5 guys off the rip that you probably have to be considering that could sweep you, depending on their set. So yeah, it's a pretty scary team. I think that there's probably, I mean, it's hard to say because it's literally like the first team that I'm rating. I think that there's probably like stronger teams in terms of offense, and I think there's stronger teams in terms of defense. But I think this team has a decent mix of both. And if it gets rolling, it's going to be really hard to stop because of the power of the momentum plus webs. So yeah, good stuff. On to next team, which I believe is, yep, Awesome E and Saltwater. They've drafted Valiant Gold and Go. Kind of a bit of a classic here. It's sort of sword draft, unbeknownst to them. Great combination though. Really strong duo. Like, you've seen it in all of Gen 9 OU. They're obviously used a lot for a reason. Gold has recently been nerfed, so I'm curious to see how it's going to operate in this new format with the Make It Rain nerfs. As well, you know, this season not having Z captains either means that it was typically a Z captain in other drafts past, so it just won't have that option either. Still a good Pokemon though. And I've sort of talked about Valiant and Gold, but I haven't mentioned Pingu here. I think having Pingu plus Gold and Go is obviously really nice. You get one of the most premium hazard setters out there, just a big fat wall setting up hazards over and over. And then you have Gold, who can just block the defog. You know, that's his whole shtick. I think that's a really good combination to have. Like I was mentioning, I think having a strong Wisher with Pingu is really nice. I don't think that Mega Ordino is that strong Wisher, especially when most games Venusaur is probably just going to fit the profile better. Like, these top 4 are really tricky to deal with, I think. And I don't see many, unless outside of a bad matchup, I don't see any reason why you probably wouldn't bring this top 4, which kind of leaves Mega Ordino out to dry a bit. You know, you can still run it as regular Ordino, and that's fine. It just obviously won't have an item, which is a little bit of an impediment. But we've seen Mega Ordino just run as regular Ordino with no item in the past. It's still fine. It still does the job. Speed tiers here are good. Sort of, you're not hitting like the upper echelon that some of these new Megas and, you know, Pulp get to. But you have a Gale Wings guy, you have 2 guys that can run booster energy. Like, you're not really that pressed to hit those higher speed tiers. You also have web support. First 2 teams off the bat both have webs. So if you need to do that, then you have that option as well, which I think is always nice to have. Some of these lower picks, actually, is that the second webber? Ariados gets webs as well, right? Yeah. So I guess if for some reason, if Vikavolt isn't doing the job, you can still bring Ariados as well. So yeah, these guys have good hazard setting. I think that the removal leaves a bit to be desired though. Talonflame's alright. We've seen it in quite a few seasons. It usually does the job and then just sort of fades away. It's fine. Tatsugiri, again, not that great. But it can do the job in a pinch. I do think though, when, you know, it's tough to say. I think that hazards are going to be a bit of an issue for this team. You always want to have good removal. This team can overwhelm you with offensive pressure, especially through Boulder and Valiant. So maybe the hazards won't come into play in some matches. But there's also quite a big emphasis with this team on like a defensive core, with, you know, Venusaur healing up and Pingu just sitting there as a wall, maybe defensive Gold and Go with Recover. I think in the matchups where those sets are good, that's when the removal issue is going to become more of an issue. These, you know, longer drawn out matches where guys have to come in on spikes or stealth rocks like 3 or 4 times in a row, I think that's going to be an issue. As well, some of these, I guess, like type profiles are a bit sketchy. Like ground in particular, most ground types can run rock coverage with Talonflame. It's still good as like a pivot, obviously, but also me and Saltwater are going to need to be pretty conscious of making, you know, smart double switches, which, you know, can be quite tricky in high pressure games. Same with the water weakness. Like Tatsugiri is kind of fake here. I don't think Tatsugiri is coming to too many games, so they're kind of forced into bringing Venusaur a lot, probably Spadef Venusaur for most water types, which isn't a bad thing because they probably want to bring Venusaur most games. But just something to be conscious of. Same with like the fire weakness as well. Tatsugiri's kind of fake yet again. And then the two main fire resists are like not exactly tanks. Talonflame can get a bit tanky. So it's maybe not the end of the world. I say all this, but Tinglu is also just sitting there, right? So like neutral attacks against Tinglu are kind of like resisted attacks versus other Pokemon that actually resist things. So that does kind of patch up the holes a little bit nicely. Yeah, momentum's lacking. Like, there's not really another way to put that. I think that kind of hurts the ability for Valiant and Boulder to sweep as easily. You know, in like a standard game, I mean, honestly, there's probably a lot of games where, like, you'd bring, say, like, what, Talon, Boulder, Val, Gold, Venusaur, Tinglu. That's probably like the best 6 Pokemon that they've drafted, right? Of that 6, only 1 has momentum. So it's going to be really tricky for Awesome and Saltwater to get those like big threats in. That's where I'm sort of saying before, like those longer drawn out matches versus hazards, like there'll have to be a lot of pivots into the tanks, which is fine, but maybe it's a bit predictable. This team's going to be easier to get momentum versus, and it's going to be up to Awesome and Saltwater to try and navigate that and figure out, okay, how do I not get overwhelmed by the opponent here? As it stands right now, I don't mind the team. I think that it could be either Dark Horse or like, you know, the top of They'll Prove Me Wrong. I wouldn't Dark Horse for now. I feel like as I go along, I might discover a few other teams that like fit the Dark Horse narrative a bit better. But like regardless, I think that this team's pretty solid. And apparently these, or at least one of the 2 of these guys haven't drafted before. So I think given that as well, like they've really constructed something pretty nice here. But I'll fact check myself on that later. I could be wrong. Alright, next up, I believe this is Retho's team with the Kyurem Black first pick. I don't believe... Ooh, I've never noticed Spider shiny before. That's a sick shiny. Yeah, I've never been a believer in Kyurem Black. That guy's... yeah. He could probably be moved down, maybe. I don't know, we'll see. Regardless, it was the first pick of choice. And it's still a threat. It's still obviously got massive stats. You can run it a bit tankier if needed as well. It doesn't have like a hail setter on this team, so that it can like, you know, get the defense raise and, you know, do some shenanigans there or try and like set up behind a veil. But regardless, it's still a strong pick, and I think, I don't know, it's hard to say because while it's the first pick, I really don't feel like it's the star of the show for this team. I think sort of like the main core that people will be looking at is these 4 individuals here who all benefit from the terrain. You know, Treads doesn't need the terrain as much as kind of like a pretty self-sufficient guy, but it's still nice to have. But Moth Coco is something we've seen in quite a few drafts, and I think that Moth is like, oftentimes it's been Z-Moth, which obviously isn't possible this draft, but it's still a big threat. It can do a lot too. Like, it doesn't just hit hard, but also having the pivoting, having T-spikes as well, gives it a lot of nice niches that it can fill. This seems very aggressive. Like these first 5 in particular, sure you can like have a tankier Treads or, you know, a max HP Coco with screens or something. But for the most part, it's offensive. You know, offense is the name of the game here. Hawlucha's not something we've seen in quite a while here in Sword Draft, as far as I remember. I don't think it's been particularly successful in the past either, sorry to say, Retho. But I'm keen to see if I'm proven wrong on that, because it's definitely a scary Pokemon that's capable of sweeping, or just disrupting as well. Like, you know, you can run sweeping sets, but also have Encore available too. You know, or substitute versus tanks or taunt, whatever you need to set up, it can kind of do it. And it'll catch unsuspecting teams off guard quite easily. Defensively, you've got Wo-Chien. You know, I'm a Wo-Chien believer. but he also can't terrestrialize this season, which is extraordinarily detrimental. Wailord is kind of fake. Oh yeah, Drifbloom actually, yeah, I forgot about Drifbloom in the terrain. Another big threat that I've seen Retho use in the past to great success. Not something to be counted out. Drifbloom's a threat for sure. But yeah, defensively, like you've got like what, Bro and Wo-Chien. Bro has to get rid of its regenerator if it wants to Mega, so I've never really been that big of a Mega Bro believer. Most times Retho's probably going to be using this as regular Bro without an item, just with TP regenerator to try and get in one of these big 5 here, which is fine. But at that point, I feel like you probably should have just drafted regular Bro and then maybe gotten like a lower point Mega elsewhere. And Wo-Chien's, like, it helps versus certain typings. Like Retho kind of needed a real Dark resist, a real Ghost resist. But it doesn't, you know, have Synthesis, it doesn't have Wish support. It's going to get worn down. And I think that's particularly worrying because if you look at the rest of this team, you know, if you just have like a Specs Ghost type or something rocking up, or a guy with Poltergeist or whatever, Retho's team is going to get ran through. There's sort of no nice way to say it. Wo-Chien is the last bastion versus Ghost types, and even Dark types to a lesser extent. So yeah, it's an offensive team, and I think Retho needs to play it as such, because if Retho gets caught on the back foot, I don't trust that this team's defensive backbone is going to hold up for particularly strong. Hazard-wise, the removal's good. I like the removal, and I think Spidops is alright in a pinch, but you're not bringing him that often. So Retho's probably not setting up too many hazards, but it's not the end of the world. I think the removal's good enough. No Cleric is fine, because I think if Retho was forced to click Wish and then spend a second turn hard swapping someone in, they're probably not in a good position in the game state to begin with if that was the case. This team doesn't want to be doing that shit. It just wants to be getting in, clicking buttons, breaking holes in enemy teams, and yeah, seeing what happens from there. It's a fun team, for sure. It looks fun to pilot. I just don't know if it's going to hold up against some of the other teams that might have, you know, stronger offensive profiles, or conversely, if there's teams that can kind of handle, like, you know, Hawlucha and Moth, for example. I don't know what else Retho's team can really do about that. You know, if say like there's a bulky water, you're kind of relying on Coco or Bust. And then if, you know, again, this is all just like what ifs. But I think there's going to be like a lot of matchups where Retho will struggle to break through teams despite the offensive nature of this team, and then not have much to fall back on. So for now, I'm going to put it in, they'll prove me wrong. And I think that's definitely possible, especially with offensive teams. Because if you just play well, then you'll win. You have the tools here to break through. It's a lot easier to prove a person wrong with an offensive team than a defensive team, I think. All you need is one good read, and then all of a sudden, momentum is heavily in your favor. Alright, moving on to Sleepy and Skatez with the newly added Mega Delphox. Arguably, you know, one of the strongest new picks available in 19 points. And I think they've drafted nicely around it. You know, first 3 picks make up a fire, water, grass core. That's pretty cool. You know, Mola, that guy used to be, I don't know, like 10 points or something. Now it's like 14. It gets raised every season, because every season someone picks it and it does well and it's annoying, and lo and behold, it somehow got picked in the second rotation still, despite being raised. So yeah, that says something. Ogerpon as well. I like it as an offensive pick. It can do quite a lot. It's a nice speed tier. It can set up spikes. It's got the like pivoting capabilities as well to allow for more Delphox hits to happen. And then yeah, around those guys, you've got like an alright defensive backbone. I think Mola's going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting defensively. Bronzong's good. It's a good Pokemon. Donphan's alright as well. It's just that they both don't have like, you know, healing native to themselves. So you're going to be relying on Wish Passing a hell of a lot if you want to, you know, do defensive things with this team. Not the end of the world, because Mole is probably the best there is at it, but just something to keep in mind for Sleepy and Skatez. On top of that, they have Baxcalibur. I hate this Pokemon. I would not be upset if I never had to face a Baxcalibur for the rest of my life, despite my personal bias. You know, it definitely has its own weaknesses, but I think it shores up a lot of the like physical damage profile for this team, because outside of it, you kind of only have like Ogerpon, maybe Silvally. Well, I mean, I guess like the tanks do physical damage as well, so yeah, kind of depends. But regardless, you've got like the big Spatak guy, you've got the big Fizz attack guy. Like, it's scary to come against, and it gives this team a lot more sweeping potential. Whereas, you know, for example, Delphox can sweep, but it's kind of like you're not setting up a DD like a Baxcalibur is, for example. Or you don't have like SD Ice Shard, you know, priority to sort of snipe the targets that would otherwise check you. So I think it adds a lot of just, yeah, a lot of scariness to this team. That is otherwise sort of relatively straightforward. I mean, you still know what Bax is going to do as well, but sometimes it doesn't fucking matter versus Bax. Yeah, type profile, there's like a few weaknesses, but I think that like Mola kind of cheats versus some of these weaknesses. Yeah, like fighting is still like a little bit scary, right? Because like if your main resist is, you know, Delphox Floette, it's not, you know, ideal. Same kind of idea with ice. You know, if Kyurem rocks up, for example, then, or, you know, some other like bundle, I know that didn't get drafted, but, you know, if someone like that rocked up, then all of a sudden you're kind of just relying on Bronzong to deal with freeze dries, which is just something to be aware of. Same with like Ghost and Dark. I think Dark in particular is probably like a little bit scarier because like Morpeko is kind of fake. Floette is alright, but it's not like super tanky. So that means like your primary knockoff switching is probably Mola, but then that guy loses his boots and all of a sudden gets a lot more susceptible to a lot of other shit that's going on in the game. Speaking of losing boots, I think that the removal for this team is a bit sketchy. Donphan's good. Morpeko and Altaria are nice niche options, but they're probably not being brought all that often. And then Silvally's alright as well. It's hard to say how you'd want to play Silvally on this team. I think offensively is probably nicer. I think if it gets forced into a defensive profile, you're probably a little bit upset. But, you know, it can still run Defog if necessary, like it's still an option to have. And then yeah, the other guy that I haven't really talked about is Floette here. No one's drafted AZ's Floette before, probably a little bit underpriced, but also probably a little bit overrated as well by some. I'm curious to see how it's going to operate. It can definitely be strong in the right conditions, and strong when pivoted into in a favorable matchup, though this team doesn't really have like a great deal of pivot. You know, Ogerpon can definitely, and Mola, they'll probably be present in most games. So, you know, it should get enough chances to be pivoted into. But I think it probably would want to be played around like a little bit more. But regardless, it's a nice, strong secondary special attacker to sort of, you know, deal with a few things that maybe Delphox might not want to. You know, for instance, like dragons come to mind. Delphox is like, you know, still can hit them with a strong psychic, but you'd obviously prefer to hit it with a stronger Moonblast from a Floette in that situation. Yeah, I think the team is solid. I think that the speed tiers are good. Type-wise, there's a few worries, but overall not too shabby. It's hard to know where to put this because, like, I think I'll put it ahead of Retho for sure. How do I feel about it in terms of compared to like Awesome and Saltwater? I feel like it has a little bit more X factor just in terms of like sweeping potential. I think Awesome E, this is like, you know, Mega Venusaur Tingle is probably like a little bit better defensively. But I think they're kind of comparable. I think I'd probably do something like, not that. I think I'd probably do something like that for now. Maybe Dark Horse, but I'm not sure. I'll leave it here for now. But I do kind of like Skatez Sleepy's team. I could definitely see myself enjoying using it, despite my hatred for the guy with base 87 speed here. Alrighty. Crikey, a lot of teams to get through. Alright, next we've got Pink's team. He has the controversial Mega Greninja. We'll see how that's piloted. I'm very curious to see if it gets 400,000 kills, like Me2 seems to think it will, or if it will sort of flounder. We'll see. But regardless, I mean, looking at it, seems pretty strong. Offensively, this team's kind of scary. You've got obviously Gren, but then Oakapon Cornerstone I think is really underrated as a pick. I think it can do a lot. There's so many teams that, like, just every season, consistently, you look at these prep docs, and I feel like more often than not, you see a team with either, like, you know, a rock weakness or a rock, like, neutrality, for example. Rock Ivy Cudgel is, like, the best rock move you can be clicking in the game, bar none. I think it's really valuable to have, and often goes under the radar. So I think that's a really good pick. Gouging Fire also kind of random on this team, but it fits nicely, I think. It sort of gives the team, you know, that dragon typing, that fire typing that's otherwise like wouldn't be present. It's, you know, surprisingly bulky. Like 105, 121, 93 is bullshit, frankly. You can run some sort of tanky Gouging Fire. You can run, obviously, you know, Dragon Dance. It can do a lot. Like, this team has a lot of offensive presence, which is pretty scary. But then defensively as well, like, you've got, you know, Double Bird in Toge and Corvi, but they're pretty different. Both weak to electric, sure. But on a team with 3 resists and a Clod, you don't really care. Outside of that, you know, you've got your primary removalist in Corviknight, secondary removalist in Toge, you've got your Wish Passer in Toge, which can be nice for, say, Gouging Fire sets that aren't running Morning Sun. Can be nice for, I guess, Clod, even though he obviously can deal with most things himself. In general, I don't really think this team needs a Wisher, though. Only maybe for specific matchups, but that's probably why, like, having a guy that will click Wish occasionally, but not in every matchup, kind of fits. I like the choice in Toge here. I think that there's also a couple other good ones here. Like, Miltank's always been reliable as a lower point guy. Azelf has always been pretty good. Obviously, it can't Terror this season. But regardless, Azelf has seen a lot of success here in Sword Draft League. Speed tier wise, I think this team's solid. Like, obviously there's a gap between 142 and 115, but like, in most situations, who gives a shit? Like, most teams aren't getting to 142 to begin with, so Pink should be pretty happy with that speed tier. I think one downside is sort of that, you know, there's kind of only 9 Pokemon in this team. I don't think Turtwig and Mankey are really being brought. Although I wouldn't put past Pink to, you know, bring a Mankey one time. So that could be a thing. Watch out, guys. Hazards are scary. There's no other way to say it. You know, all 3 of these guys are competent stealth rockers who could be coming in at some point. You know, same with these 3 and same with these 2 for the other 2 hazards. So definitely could be a thing. And then in terms of removal, like, you've got Corviknight, that guy is probably going to be removing, 6 out of 6 games in the regular season. That's kind of what it does. Would another like premier option that's also not a bird be nice? Yeah. Would a spinner be nice? Yeah. But it's probably not the end of the world that Corby's going to be the primary guy to do this stuff. Yeah, I've mentioned the healing. Momentum's really good on this team, which I think just makes Gren even scarier. And yeah, overall, I quite like this team. And I think that if I was to put it somewhere right now, I'd probably put it up here in playoffs. I think I like it more than... how do I move this properly? There we go. I think that's the order I like things right now. I'll be curious to see if it moves its way up there, but for now, I'll leave it there. Alright, moving on, I think is Connor and Cheese's team. Yep. Yeah, this team is pretty scary. You just have to look at these top 5 guys and instantly you're like, okay, that's, those 5 guys are probably coming to most matches, and those 5 guys are going to be really annoying to deal with. Alright, there we go. Don't know what happened there. Shaman Sky is a little bit of a fraud, just because, everyone just runs Covert versus it, but it's still been pretty strong. Regardless, it's still a pretty strong pick. We've seen it do a lot, just a lot of damage in the past. It doesn't necessarily have to be some sort of full offensive set. It can be sub-seed, it can be a lot of things. I think it gives a nice sort of, different damage mix to this team overall. So I'm curious to see how that does, and obviously the speed tier is nice. The main thing to look at though is the Mega X drill here. Curious to see how it goes. I think that in isolation it's probably not worth 17 points, but I think that Connor and Cheese have drafted the exact type of team you should be drafting around this drill, which is Sand, so that you essentially are getting 2 Pokemon in one. You're getting the new, slightly faster, stronger drill, but you're also getting the usual Sand Rush Sweeper pre-Mega if you want to do that. Which is obviously really scary. It means that you essentially have 2 things to watch out for. They can switch it up on a dime if they need the extra speed, if they need the extra defense, because it gets plus 40 defense or something ridiculous upon megaing. They've essentially just drafted a Gen 5 Sand team, which I think is pretty cool. Just with a few new toys, such as, I guess, actually they haven't drafted anything past Gen 7. And that's a stretch because the Gen 7 guys do Biter. So, yeah, it's essentially just a Gen 5 team, which is cool. Except, despite it being a Gen 5 team, you have things like Ice Beam, Earth Power, Keldeo. You have whatever Lardy has gotten since then, like Flip Turn. Cofagrigus just recently got Parting Shot, so you have more pivoting options. I think in general, this sort of top 7 core is really quite scary. Offensively, there's a lot that they can do. Defensively, it's not super crazy strong, but I think floor just wishing into say Tyranitar or the newly buffed Cofagrigus, I think it's a decent enough defensive backbone to where you can just sort of Baton Pass or Parting Shot into one of these 5 and start doing ridiculous damage. Again, the speed tiers are also a little bit fake because you have this guy who double his speed pre-Mega, which is obviously pretty good. And Tyranitar is also a bit of a wild card too. It can it's jack of all trades. You can run it defensively if you need more sand turns. You could run it as a Dragon Dance Sweeper if it randomly had a good angle for it. Banded T-Tar if you really wanted to as well. Some sort of mixed set with its coverage. I think it's, something to look out for. Again, I think once this team sort of gets put on the back foot, it's going to be a little bit hard to recover. But I think in most matchups, they're going to find themselves on the front foot, pretty often. I don't think it's going to be hard for these guys to sort of find an advantage. And once this team gets an advantage, who switches into these 3 or these 4? It's kind of impossible. And then yeah, like type chart wise, you know, you've got a good flying resist in T-Tar here. Like in general, what the only flying types, I guess there's a few of them, flying fighting types, but other than that, like it's pretty covered, you know. Rock is a little bit annoying, but again, not like the end of the world. In general, like there's enough switch-ins. Ghost is probably the one you're most worried about, but again, you have like one of the best Ghost switch-ins for the past 25 years in T-Tar. So again, like there's not too much for them to be worried about off the rip. It's going to be like very hyper-specific matchups, like if you're versing a Mega Raptor or a Annihilate or something. But these power rankings don't consider matchups, and I wouldn't even know if they verse anyone that has those Pokemon. So yeah, in general, I think it's a strong team. Hazards are scary. There's a lot to be worried about. Random T-spikes as well. Lots of rocks options to just make sweeping even easier. Removal is... I don't really trust the defoggers. Neither of these guys want to be running it that much. But drill runs spin pretty often, so it's kind of not that crazy to think that hazards will be removed for Connor and Cheese. I actually thought the pivoting... Oh, I guess Cofagrigus isn't on here, so that's fair. The pivoting could be better, but I think that this not having Cofagrigus kind of doesn't tell the story well enough. Yeah, not too much more to say. I think this team's pretty solid. It's got a lot of options, and you can see it like slotting in here, for example. Maybe it could go with Pink's team. I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to reevaluate that. But yeah, on to the next. Alright, we've got Karp Me2. Another Oakpon. They've all been drafted, except for the water one, which is probably the best one, surprisingly. They also have Karp. Cool. Love that. Alright, what do we got here? Good speed tiers, just to initially look at that. Not too much concern. Like, it's a really nice spread, actually. Really, really nice there. Great hazard options. They've got alright removal. I think that, yeah, Scarm's good, but its longevity isn't as good as something like a Corv, for example. So Karp Me2 are probably going to have to be pretty careful on that front. Spin Quaquaval is not bad though, but again, like, they're just going to have to find ways to prolong these guys' lives if they are the removal option, if they need to be I think the main thing to look at with this team though is the newly added Mega Galgi. I think this thing's a giga threat. I think that it's going to be extraordinarily hard to break. All you have to do is just look at some calcs and realize that it can, you know, tank some hits that should not be possible. Yeah, the calcs are kind of crazy for this thing. And then it regenerates back up, and all you need is to sort of have one, you know, decent pivot into something that it resists, and all of a sudden you've gotten back like 60% of your health through 2 switches, and then you can tank that ridiculous calc again. Sorry. So, yeah, I think that defensively, this team's going to be a bit tricky to deal with. Like, Galgi, fantastic Spadev, who can run defense to offset a bit of that. Scarm, fantastic defense, works really well in tandem with Galgi. I think those two picks together are really smart, and I like what they bring to the table. In terms of like offensive guys, where am I? You've got the main ones are sort of Lele and Spectria to look at for the well. I say that you've also got Shocks as well. Kind of looking at this team, I'm starting to realize there's a huge emphasis on special attack compared to attack. You see, like, This is kind of cheating because, you know, you've got Magic Carp down here, which fucks the averages. It really isn't doing any favors there. But the attack is like way higher. You've got Spec, you've got Shocks, you've got Lele, you've got Galgi. They're probably coming to most games. That's 4 special attackers off the rip, right? Ogerpon and Quaquaval are the primary physical guys, but they're not like super strong. So I think that that's something that Karp Me2 are going to have to be aware of going into matches. That, you know, if you do come across something that has a huge physical defense stat, or sorry, a huge special defense stat, or, you know, assault vest or whatever it might be, it's something to be very conscious of, which might make matchups a bit trickier for them. Like I said, I think the removal could be like a little bit better, but that's not too bad. Momentum wise, it's fine. I think these 4 momentum is kind of all you really need. Obviously Scum, its main thing has always been like, if it could U-turn like Corby, then it would be like so phenomenal. But unfortunately it cannot. But I think there's enough momentum here to where you can get in Spec or Lele to start doing some crazy stuff. These guys can kind of break through even the sturdiest Spidef walls, so maybe that's not going to be a real issue for Karp Me2. I guess we'll have to see. And then yeah, like obviously there's all sorts of other moves that like I don't really go into with this stuff. But overall, yeah, I quite like the team. I think it's strong. I think it has like a couple things to watch out for. I still think it'll make playoffs. I quite like it around here. Yeah, I think this is probably where I'd put it for now. Like comparing it to the other 2 teams that just came before. Yeah. Like this one's a bit more top heavy, maybe a bit more predictable, but I do like especially the top 5. This one has like 7 guys that are really strong. I guess I didn't mention Sneasel and Tangela. Like they're both actually really good picks too. So it's something to consider. Like their low tiers are actually pretty good. Yeah, I think like these teams could easily like swap either way. Like they're all like these 3 in particular. I think they're quite equal. I like them quite a lot. I think I'll leave Karp Me2 down here though, just for now, just because I think, yeah, some of the type chart is a little bit sketchy. The, you know, overemphasis on special attack, like different things like that, I think might make it a little bit trickier for them to navigate some like, you know, teams that might like say hazard stack or have particular special walls or whatever. But overall, like I wouldn't be shocked to see Karp Me2 as players get top 4, make it to finals again, you know, whatever might happen. That really would not shock me in the slightest. Yeah, like I said, these 3 teams in particular could easily swap around, so cool. On to the next. Time's over. I mean, like, if you had to, if, you know, all these names were covered up and you asked me which team was Times' team, I would say this one, and it wouldn't take me particularly long to figure it out. It just looks like a Times team. There's a Diancie, there's a Primarina, there's a Vanillux, there's a Funky Mega, there's an emphasis on some, like, you know, strong offensive guys, a bit less defense oriented, but there's still a nice defensive backbone there. That's a Times team. Why he's decided that he would pick Sneasler for the first time right after Diaclaw gets nerfed, not sure. Does it matter? No, because you can't actually proc it in this draft league. So yeah, the nerfs don't actually matter. Offensively, this team's, yeah, pretty scary. Sneasler's great. Heliolisk is pretty solid for like a mid-range guy, and it now gets access to Shedtail, which is obviously pretty good when you could maybe set up a Veil as well. Shedtail behind a Veil into a Sneasler who can start SDing, or a Volcarona who can start QDing. Yeah, pretty scary. Speed tier wise, this team could be a bit better on that front. Sneasler does kind of cheat, can become like the fastest thing in the entire game. but I do think that Times, more than sort of like a lot of the other teams that have come across so far, is going to need to probably bring like a dedicated scarf to each match, maybe even 2 in really bad matchups or something. But he has good options for that. Like Brook's good, Helios is alright at that. And you know, things like Vanillux and Serena can scarf in a pinch if necessary. There's a good sort of Grassfire Watercore. I think in particular Primarina's fantastic. Serena's always been good in this draft league. And then Volk, it's like, it's interesting. Yeah, kind of hit or miss. But it wouldn't shock me to see Times use it perfectly. So we'll see what happens. I'm particularly interested in Mega Trimecha though. I think that thing's very underrated. I think it'll do really, really well. And I think it fits this team like pretty nicely. It sort of has, you know, the disruption. It has like knockoff. It has all sorts of, you know, disruptive moves. It gets default, which is really kind of pivotal for this team, I think. Because otherwise having to rely on Serena and Volcarona every game for removal is, yeah, pretty sketchy. Also, just as like a general cleric, you're probably not clicking Wish with this thing. His HP is pathetic, but Heal Bell in particular for a team that has like, you know, 1, 2, 3 prominent physical attackers, quite nice. It's good to have. It's also just tough to deal with defensively, and that can mean that Times can run, you know, positive power, stored power if he wants to games. There's going to be some teams that are just not going to be able to deal with that. Its main weakness in ground is circumvented with Levitate. It's kind of just Bronzong, but it's got like a lot of moves that Bronzong kind of wishes that it had in Recover, mainly. But also like cleric stuff. I still don't know why Bronzong doesn't get Heal Bell. Shit doesn't make sense. Pivot wise, yeah, it's a Times team. It has good pivot. Like, nothing really to say here. I think it'll be pretty easy for Times to get like Vulcan, for example, off of like a Primarina. Like hard switch into that guy, flip turn out on the next guy, get Vulcan, start QDing, GG. Same with Shutdown. Like, I think that's going to be really pivotal in some games. Even just the threat of it is going to be really quite difficult to navigate. Yeah, I think overall, like, this team looks fun. The only issue is that defensively, I think it's a bit questionable. Your main, like, Jamaica's like the main tank. Outside of that, you have a guy that doesn't heal, a guy that doesn't heal, a guy that sometimes heals, a guy that doesn't heal. Like, the longevity of this team isn't great. So I think it's kind of like a bit more one note maybe compared to some of the teams up here. But offensively, it kind of has the tools to win every match. It's just going to be difficult to do it in certain matchups compared to like other teams that might have like a couple more like plan C's, plan D's. In general, I like it. It looks fun to use. I think that some of the concerns with like, yeah, speed tiers, like they're not bad, but you know, a little bit worse than some other teams. And like the defensive profile, especially when we've added a bunch of really strong new offensive megas, I think it would be difficult to navigate. So for now, I'm going to put it in Dark Horse because I fully expect that, you know, this team will end up somewhere up here because it has the tools to do so. But I also think that, you know, if given a bad matchup, this team could like get deconstructed a lot more easily than some of the teams above it, just based on, yeah, the defensive side of things there. I also think as well, I'll probably move DB and James down to Dark Horse because, like, reflecting on it, these three teams are like very close in my opinion. Whereas I think that DB and James' team is kind of more akin to Times' team. I think as I'm going through this, I'm starting to realize that. All right. What we got next? I think this is Bandrews, new to this draft. And they've drafted, yeah, the Froslass plus King Gambit core that I know at least like 3 other people were interested in. So clearly they're doing something right if everyone is interested in grabbing those guys. In particular, I think Frostlass will be very good. A little bit susceptible to, you know, certain matchups. Its speed tier is good, but not like phenomenal. Which is kind of crazy to say about 120, but that's just power creep, I guess. But yeah, I think just like I was saying about like the rock typing, how it often is just, you know, more often than not, most teams have a really shit matchup into rock. Ice is kind of like that second type. You can see the Bandrews apparently has like 4 billion resists though, so that kind of defeats my point there. But in general, Ice is usually, and Ghost actually. Ghost is the other type. Rock, Ice, and Ghost are usually the big three that most teams struggle to resist. And I think because of that, Frostlass is going to have a bit of a field day in certain matchups. And it's pretty versatile. You can run Wisp Hex, you can run Veil, you can run Destiny Bond, you can run Nasty Plot. Obviously there's the really strong Blizzards, which is like the most just obvious thing to run on this thing. In general, it's very strong. So I'm curious to see how it operates. I think that Cyclizar, it's fine. I don't know what it really adds to this team. I guess this, like, Frostlass behind a Veil is really nice. I mean, behind a Shed Tail is really nice. You know, same with Lando. If you get an opportunity to put Lando behind a sub and then it clicks Plot, or it clicks, you know, Rock Polish, or some such thing or another, like, that's going to be really hard to deal with. I think the speed tiers could be a little bit better though. So Cyclizar doesn't really add much on that front. Gap between Frostlass and Landorus is, yeah, it's a little bit annoying. Not the end of the world. I think the main thing to sort of look out for though is that, presuming Landorus is mostly special, it doesn't have to be, but it's just better at it than physical. You kind of only have like one like super prominent physical sweeper. I guess you've got Octavish, but the hail will run out a bit quicker because of no, what's it called, Icy Rock. So in terms of damage, like, you're mainly looking at special attack, which is fine, but it's kind of the same thing that I was saying with Karp Me2 team, except this team doesn't have like as strong like immediate breakers as say like, you know, Specs Lele or Specs Spectre or something to that effect. And defensively, it's like not as strong, say, as Karp Me2 team. It doesn't have like the Dragalge core, things like that. It does have double regenerator, I suppose, but Cyclizar is kind of fake on that front. Toxapex is good. I do think that there are a lot of offensive teams this time around though, so I'm not sure if it'll get like taken advantage of with like, you know, offensive taunt sets from other guys or something like that. But it's definitely still important for this team to have like a dedicated tank like Toxapex, I think. Yeah, well, Shuckle. Yeah, okay. I should just remove Shuckle before looking at things like this. Acids are really good though. I think that, like, yeah, that's another thing with Frostlass. Spikes is really nice. You've got T-Spikes and Pex. These guys are probably like unlikely to click rocks, but they can. I think Tun's obviously a lot better at it though, or just it prefers to run it, I guess. And then in terms of removal, like Zapdos is kind of like Corby in that if you need things removed, then yeah, having a Zapdos or a Corby on your team is like the best possible thing to have. And then there's a couple other secondary options, like Defog Landorus is a thing, I guess. Cyclizar, if it comes, it's probably running Spin, plus U-Turn, plus, you know, Shed Tail, plus Draco or Knock. So it's pretty common that you could have like a secondary remover here if you really wanted to as well. So I think Hazard Control's good. In terms of momentum, could be a little bit better. But it's not too bad. It's definitely not too bad, especially when one of the momentum options is Shed Tail. But I think a bit more would have been nice for, say, Frostlass to be able to get in more easily. Or honestly, for Gambit to be able to get in more easily. I think this guy's going to be really important for the team to succeed. yeah, type profile is like not bad. Like the primary Ghost and Dark switching, or mainly Ghost, is King Gambit, which is, you know, he's pretty good at it. But if King Gambit goes down, there's obviously going to be a few issues there. Same with like Rock as well. Like Rock in particular, like all the Rock resists are outside of Hitmonchan, I guess, who's kind of fake. They're weak to Earthquake as well. So it's just something to be conscious of for Bandrews there. Yeah, I think the team's good. I just am not sure if it has as much of like the sweeping potential as like the Dark Horse teams up here. And it's not as like defensively sound as say like, you know, say Karp Me2's team. I don't know where Bandrews is. There he is. I think I'm going to put it here because I like the team. Maybe here because I like Skatez Sleepy's team as well. Yeah, it's tough to say. Like these teams are all pretty good still. That's the thing. I remember Kivs saying in the in Draft General after draft phase finished that yeah, there's just like a lot of good teams. It's like putting Bandrews' team here doesn't feel right, but I kind of like these teams above it a bit more, I guess. And honestly, I have nothing in top 4 yet, so I could very easily see like these 3 moving into top 4 and then, you know, change up the whole makeup of what's going on here. So teams are more likely to shift up, I would say. Right, so for now, I'm just going to skip mine and Pingu's team, just because I asked Me2 about it, and he said it'd probably be like around 10th. So I'm just going to reassess where like everything is and sort of slot that team in accordingly and talk about it at the end. On to the next is... yep. Alrighty, we've got our team. This somehow worked out, despite everything being random. This team is actually not nearly as bad as it could have been, which is, like, I feel like in most situations you got, like, best possible pools. Maybe not the Megas. I think Skarm's good, I think Shandy's, like, pretty bad. I'd rather just have a Blacephalon who doesn't take up my Mega slot. But for this particular team that doesn't have a Ghost or a Fire type, I mean, you take it. Absolutely, you take it. Yeah. Kind of hard to evaluate Al's decisions because he didn't actually make any. I think that this team is, you know, it's capable, which is crazy for a randomized team. It's a capable team. Lando's obviously fantastic. It's like the glue that kind of holds this ragtag bunch together. Skarm, I think, is really solid. I think as an offensive threat, it's like terrifying. And as a team with 2 Megas on it, getting a Skarm randomized for you that can operate as just a regular Skarm if you bring Mega Shandy, that's like best possible scenario. Like, it's still a good pick, even without an item. I think, like, this type chart looks good, but I think it's important, like, to sort of see, like, extra context. Like, sure, the team is green versus dragon, but, like, you have 1 resist. Dragons kind of eat this team alive. The dark typing as well is, like, really... Like, knockoff is terrifying for this team, because one of your dark resists runs an EVO Light. You have a Porygon who's like a generic, you know, covers all bases tank who doesn't want to get hit with knockoff. And then outside of that, what you've got Hisuian Samurott, who's like fine as a switcher, but not super tanky. So yeah, I think like Dark in particular is like a massive threat to our team here. Yeah, rock typing, believe it or not, it shows up yet again. So it's just something that Al's going to have to be aware of there. Speed tiers are obviously pretty scuffed. You know, there's scope for like a scarfed Lando and or a scarfed Rotom or a scarfed Samu to sort of patch that up. But it's still not ideal to be in that situation with the speed tiers. Hazards are nice though. Hazards are definitely nice. You've got Lando to control things if necessary. Secondary defog is also fine. And then in terms of like setting up rocks and shit, Al has options. It's not bad. No cleric, which is, you know, when what, like 1, 2, 3, 4 out of your 5 main damage sources are physical attackers. Not having a cleric is pretty sketchy. And then yeah, in terms of like momentum, it's got good momentum. I don't think that can be debated. So yeah, like overall this team obviously has flaws. And I think because of that I'm putting it like down here. But it's not nearly as flawed as it could have been. And I think Al's he's gonna have a lot of fun cooking with this. I think it adds a like unpredictability to his team because there's trick room angles. There's, you know, what's the Skarmory gonna do? Is it gonna be weak armor? Is it just gonna be like not holding it, or just regular Skarm with a Mega Stone that's defensive? Is he randomly gonna bring Swadloon and set up webs? It doesn't get webs apparently. Never mind. Well, that sucks. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this does because he has options. It's Ceaseless Edge as well for spikes too. Like, this team's gonna be annoying. I think that Al can cook with this. I think it's kind of the definition of they'll prove me wrong. So we'll see what happens. I don't know whose team this is. Sweatybagels. Alright, there we go. Where is it? Alright, cool. Yeah, nice. Alright. I mentioned Mega Raptor before, talking about Connor and G's team. We'll start with Mega Raptor, I guess. I think that guy is a pretty good pick. It can do a lot. I think that it has decent potential pre-Mega and sort of like a bulk up bot before you start just sending out contrary close combats. Yeah, it's a nice offensive pick. I think that, you know, for the rest of the team, it can soften up some things that, say, like Weavile might struggle versus. Not that it's been picked, but like when I see Weavile, I immediately think of Buzzwole. You know, guys like that, like your Scizors, shit like that, who Staraptor does pretty decently versus those guys. So I think it's like a sort of, as a sweeper it's alright, but also as a facilitator it's quite nice for this team here as well. Speed tiers are pretty good. They're actually like really evenly spread. I like that quite a lot. You've also got priority in Ice Shard, which is nice. You've got, you know, shift gear on Genesect, which is, you know, terrifying as someone who lost to that last season from Bagels specifically. So that's a pretty scary thing to consider. I can't remember if we lost to shift gear or special, but regardless, I mean, Genesect's a pain in the ass to prep for. So it's quite nice to have on the team. Terrapagos is, you know, kind of that eternal removalist. Like, if shit hits the fan, you should be able to get a spin off, which is nice. Just looking at this team, is there really any other removal? Because this isn't, like, if you're running defog on your Staraptor, then you've probably already lost. If the Raptor's been delegated defog duty, and then Delmice is kind of fake. So yeah, I mean, like, if there's a competent Ghost on the other team, then Hazard's staying up versus Bagels, which I think is like pretty detrimental. You know, but hopefully that's not always the case. Hopefully Bagels gets to play some matches versus, you know, non-defensive Ghost types. The actual Hazard setting is like pretty decent as well. Like, one of these guys will very easily get rocks up every game. Yeah, I like this team's offensive profile. I think that Genesect, Raptor, Weavile's pretty difficult to sort of like work around. And then Terrapagos and Necrozma sort of make up the back end. I'm not entirely sure what Necrozma's going to do. We haven't seen it since it could Terra back in Season 7, and then we complex that shit because it was broken beyond compare. So I'm curious how useful it's going to be as just like a mono psychic type, but it's got the moves to do things, and it also gets No, I was gonna say it gets shift gear, it doesn't, it gets auto-atomize, so I'm lying. Yeah, in general, I think this team's decent. Offensively, I like it more than defensively, I think. Mainly just because like guys like Terrapagos and Swampert and Dragalge can't natively heal themselves. They would really appreciate a more confident Wisher than Clefairy. Terrapagos plus Wish is really difficult to deal with. Without it, it becomes a lot more manageable. So I think this team needs to get like a strong start in most of its matches, because if it doesn't, then I can see it kind of falling behind. In saying that, even if it falls behind, as long as the last Pokemon is Genesect and it gets a favorable like 1v1 when it comes out, it could just make a 1-5 comeback. So something to consider there. Anything else that I want to mention with this team? Momentum's like fine. I don't know how often Raptor will be using Momentum, but it definitely can. Yeah, in general, the team's not bad. I do like it. I just think that it could struggle a lot in certain situations. So yeah, just something to keep in mind there. I'm going to put the team here, I think. But again, like, it's still a good team, even though I put it here. I would still use this team. It looks fun. It looks like it could do some serious damage, so yeah. What have we got next? Ah, yes. This is Yonis's team, which, yeah, it looks scary. Newly buffed Mega Lopunny, because that guy definitely needed help. Now with Sword Sand Spark Punch, because why not? I think it flew under the radar a little bit with all the new guys that were getting picked. Honestly, maybe a hot take, this guy could be the strongest Mega available on the board right now, because of the buffs. When you pair that with an insanely strong special attacker in Darkrai and all reliable in Chomp, like, that's a pretty ridiculous call. You know, you've got in the lower points as well, you've got your Steel type, you've got your Fairy type to go along with that. Weezing has always been really consistent. Iron Crown, without terrain, it's like fine. It's definitely way better with terrain. But it's still solid. Like, and it's not super expensive, so I get why it was picked. I think the only thing, like, just to eyeball is there's like a lot of clumping of speed tiers here, obviously. But like, it's, you know, if your guy just has speed, it has speed. It's not the end of the world. It's not something to fret over. Even with the removal of Terra, Articuno is still probably going to be really annoying to deal with. This team just has a lot going for it, I think. Offensively, these two cover, you know, a lot of stuff for each other. And then if you need a third guy to be offensive, Chomp can still fit that role. Even offensive Crown's not bad, like Specs Crown or Scarf Crown. It's a legit set. I think this team's really solid. Yeah, hazards are obviously pretty good. Meowstic now gets every hazard in the game, so if Yonis really wants to, he can just set up every hazard in the game, chuck a sash on this guy, you get two of them, you know, rocking a spike, rocking a screen, like, yeah, you just do whatever. Removal is also really good too. These, like, you can easily bring 1, 2, 3 of these guys to every game. Like, probably 2, more likely. But you get to just choose who you want to have removal on, which is a nice choice to have. You don't really have like a Wisher, but in terms of Heal Bell, Articuno's got that covered. Same with Weezing. So even though this guy is pretty susceptible to say like Static or Will-O-Wisp or things like that, you can circumvent that if it comes to pass. And yeah, in terms of like type matchups as well, like there's a few like of these grey ones, but there's like enough it's not like it's grey with like 1 weakness, 1 resist. No, like for fire, you've got Rotom and Chomp that can cover things, which is nice. For fighting, you've got Weezing. Well, fighting's maybe a little bit scary, honestly. But like say flying, you've got these two that can resist. That's pretty good. Ghost as well. Like, you know, you can bring type null if you really need to. So I think the type chart's pretty nice here. Yeah, momentum's solid as well. I think that it's got a good amount of momentum. I think it's just a really solid team, offensively and defensively. Yeah, it's kind of hard to pinpoint like what exactly it does best. I think it's kind of like a jack of all trades team. And while it might be like a master of none, it's certainly very good at all of those trades. I just think this is a consistent enough team to get Yonis into the top 4 here. You know, I could also put it in playoffs, but I suspect what's probably going to happen is we're going to move a couple of these teams up rather than this team down. Yeah, it's just got a lot of really reliable picks over the seasons, and one of those picks just got really buffed. So yeah, very curious to see how they do with this team. But yeah, I think for now, putting it up here kind of makes sense to me. Alright, moving on to Sylveon's team. Who's the Mega? Meowstic, yep, okay. I'm very curious to see how that one does, because it should, in theory, operate like Mega Zam, just worse, which is why it's obviously less points than Zam was. But you do get the added benefit of, you know, all of these hazards that do exist, kind of like as we just discussed with the last Meowstic. So you can kind of run this guy. Is it base 124 or 34 speed? 24. Yeah, a little bit obnoxious, but that's fine. But you can run this guy with like the standard, you know, Mega Zam set. But you could just chuck a Spike last move if you really wanted to. And then when you inevitably get switched on by a Dark type, just set up a Spike. And life's fine. You can also run Plot on this thing. So, you know, as long as there's no like Pursuit Trapper still around, you can sort of get up a Plot and sweep a lot easier than maybe Zam could in the past, because it didn't have access to those boosting moves. It's going to be difficult to navigate. Like, I think using this Pokemon is going to require like a lot of careful planning. You know, planning around Scars, planning around Pursuit, planning around Sucker Punch, because it will just get dropped by literally anything. You know, these defenses are not much. But I think that if the planning is done, then this thing could really succeed. It's got like a decent team around it as well. I think being able to like, you know, have dedicated lead Aero, you know, dedicated Spiker and Frostlass. There's a lot you can do in terms of leads here, which I think benefits the Meowstic a bit. I would say overall, like, these picks are pretty high variance, I would say. You know, maybe Aero does a lot in a game, or maybe it just gets one shot and sets up rocks, and then they get spun on turn 3. So it's kind of hard to say. Same with like Orthworm. I think there's been a lot of situations where like Orthworm has been picked by people and it hasn't exactly been that phenomenal. Yeah, I'm curious to see how this team goes, because there's like a lot of offensive threats, but I think defensively this team will just get overwhelmed. Like, the only real defensive switch in that can, you know, be a bit like self-sufficient is Amoonguss. Rotom Heat's also good, just a little bit less reliable in terms of healing itself. But I think there's going to be like a lot of burden placed on like these three to sort of, you know, deal with threats as they come up, so that like, you know, Meow or Psydog or Palafin can do the rest. But I'm not sure that the defensive core is going to be strong enough to meet that burden. Yeah, one guy I haven't mentioned is Palafin though. That guy's always a threat, so something to look out for, especially with Shed Tail support. shed tailing into the Palafin, and then it starts setting up. Or even if it's just banded, like you get more hits off in that situation, which is quite nice. Speed tiers are good as well, quite like them. And yeah, I mean, not really, like Dashman's kind of a wisher, but like it's pretty low HP. But this team doesn't really have the, you know, the strong tanks to benefit from a massive wish anyway, so I don't think that's the end of the world. This team wants to be piloted very offensively, which is why I'm kind of a bit worried for it, because I don't think it has much to fall back on if that fails. But yeah, overall, it's definitely not a bad team. Like, there's still a lot going for it, and I think that if Sylveon pilots it well, then it could be really dangerous to deal with this guy, or this guy, or this guy, or this guy. There's a lot that opponents are going to have to consider in prep and in the middle of a match if something goes a bit south. For now, I'm probably going to put it here. But I can still see it like doing some big damage, especially in a good matchup. Like if there's not, you know, if there's not a pursuit guy, or if there's not like a competent dark type, Meowstic will go crazy. If Obstacoon gets behind a shed tail, then that guy's gonna start just throwing out hits like no tomorrow. Like there's a lot that's gonna have to be considered here in prep. So yeah. All right, what are we up to here? Yep, Toast team. Alright, this team's pretty strong. You can tell it's been influenced by Sara. It has a Zamazenta. It has things like Kuro, Melodic. They're all strong picks. I think in terms of like defensive cores, this is one of the strongest we have in the draft, I'd say. Because you have like a ridiculous Dragon Fairy Steel core. Zama Screamtail Kyurem is just such a disgusting core. Zama with Wish behind it is also disgusting. Just really, really strong picks to have. You have Moltres, who's always been a tried and true, you know, defensive defogger in our metagame. Obviously a bit nerfed by the fact that Terra no longer exists. So, you know, it's obviously just now genuinely susceptible to rock moves as opposed to being fake susceptible to rock moves in seasons prior. But it's still going to be useful. The 1 point is a shit. So there's kind of only 9 Pokemon here. Though Slugma. Maybe Slugma comes. And then in terms of like the new Mega that's been brought, I think Golurk is like pretty questionable. It's fine. It's strong. And it's a bit more difficult to KO than regular Golurk, which means that it might be able to get like an extra hit off before it goes down, or it might be able to trade more easily. But I really don't think it's the star of this show. You can set up Trick Room for it with Screamtail, but I think it's going to be a little bit clunky to use like that anyways. But in saying that, it does give, you know, I'm pretty sure it's the only Earthquake user on this team. Maybe Dunsparce gets Earthquake, I don't know, but it gives that nice ground stab, which is good, and it gives that nice ghost stab, which is otherwise not had on this team. And we've already seen a couple teams that are weak to ghost, you know, so far when looking at these teams. So yeah, I mean that's not bad to have, and I think, or I guess what I was saying is that I think that mainly the stars of the show is like the solid defensive backbone. Like this guy and then these 5 up here, they could be brought to every match, and it would be a solid team in every match. In fact, you'd have Dragon Fairy Steel, Grass, Fire, Water every match if you brought those 6, which is kind of insane to be able to do in like your 6 best picks. Yeah, overall, I mean, I like this team. It's really solid. I think it can be piloted really well. Speed tiers are pretty good. Not too much to complain about. If you're forced to run a more defensive Screamtail, then maybe then like the speed control gets a little bit dodgy. But still something that people are going to have to prep around this base 111. Zarude as well is a little bit nerfed by no terror as well, just something to point out. But it's nice to have just as like a dark type, which is pretty important given that Ghost is like really good into Toph's team. Same with Dark as well, although Zama kind of has most Dark types covered off. Yeah, type-wise, you've got what? Fighting weakness, which is like a bit sketchy, but Screamtail is pretty good versus that, honestly. So I wouldn't say it's like that crazy weakness. And then ground weakness, you've got Moltres, but again, that's pretty sketchy because most ground types are packing Stone Edge or Rock Slide or something. So yeah, I think that could be a genuine concern. Something to keep in mind there. Anything else on this side, or I think it should be good to scroll down. Yeah, hazards are crazy. Toph will have no trouble setting up hazards. Like, it's, yeah, extraordinarily easy with Glamora on the team. And then there's some secondary rock setters as well if necessary. Removal's shocking. Like, Moltres is good, but it's not a Corvi, it's not a Zapdos. There's a reason it's a few less points than those guys. So yeah, if Moltres ever dies, then you could just start seeing Zamaset to take like 25% from spikes every time it comes in. Which is obviously pretty detrimental. And yeah, the momentum is pretty dodgy as well, honestly. Which is not bad. But like it's not as bad in this case because you have such strong like tanks. Like this guy doesn't get momentum, but he just can hard switch super easily, you know. So you know you're not too upset about that. Same with like someone like Kieran. That guy doesn't need momentum because he's just gonna sweep the entire team. So in fact, I swear this. So, yeah, honestly, like. These four are probably coming most matches anyways, and they're probably running momentum, so like, it looks bad on paper, but I think in reality it's actually not even that bad. Wow. The sole priority move in Quick Attack Slamanander. I hope we get to see that brought to a match. That would make me very happy. Yeah, alright, interesting. I think it's a good team though. Very good team. Fuck, this tier list looks so scuffed, man. I'm gonna put it like here for now. It's on the same tier as these teams to me, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure what I want to do with this. I currently have one team in top 4, which is not great. Some of these teams are gonna have to move up. I think, yeah, if I did that. Is that better? I'll revisit this. It's gonna sit somewhere in this field though. Alright. Third last team to go through. We have Kivs and Lucas now. I think this team's really solid. I think Moon plus Raichu is a really good combination, just in terms of really strong special attacker, really strong physical attacker. Both are really strong momentum users as well. It's going to be tough to switch. I don't know why the Raichu is so blurry. It's pissing me off. Yeah, these guys are going to be really difficult to switch into. Obviously, Raichu can't use Zap Cannon, but it can still just click Thunder, which has a 30% chance to parry anyways. It's going to be really difficult. Like, there's not many things that can deal with Raichu. Because, like, even, like, you'd think, oh, ground type, but then you get Grass Knotted or Served. Or you think a Dragon type, but then you get Alluring Voiced. So, there's going to be hyper-specific counters to that guy. And if you can figure one out, and one of the answers is probably an Assault Vest of some kind, then you have to deal with the best knockoff user that we have available to draft. It makes things really difficult, because you don't want anything switching into this. You don't want your items knocked. You don't want your Assault Vest knocked, because if that happens, then you instantly just lose to Raichu. Speed tiers are great. 130 is pretty solid. You have this guy who just sits in the middle, which is nice, but can also run Booster or Dragon Dance to sort of circumvent any speed control issues. Yeah, it's going to be tricky to deal with these two. Defensively, it's also going to be tricky to deal with this team. Because you have Gliscor, who's always a pain in the ass. You have Ferrothorn, who honestly hasn't been drafted that much. So I'm kind of curious to see if it does well. You would kind of assume it will do okay. Because we've all kind of seen Ferrothorn and what it does for the last 15 years of our lives. But yeah, I'm curious how that sort of translates to a draft format. But then also, like, Grassfire Water and Colossal Mantine and Ferrothorn is, like, kind of nice. It's a lower point take on that core, but it's pretty solid, all things considered. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, in most games, you're probably not bringing Glalie or Gloom. Those guys are kind of not real, I don't think. Yeah. And then what? You've got like Ninetales who can set up a Sun for Moon, which is nice. There's probably like some sort of Weather Ball users as well that can maybe make use of Fire type Weather Ball. I'm not sure. I haven't actually checked that. But yeah, I think it's pretty solid overall as a team. The hazards are fucked. Like, this team has, I would say, the best hazards. Which, you know, kind of goes part and parcel with having a Gliscor, I guess. But yeah, I mean, as far as hazard stacking goes, this team is probably going to be the best at it, outside of maybe like a really insane Lamora game. But yeah, I think as well, someone that's important to, like, it's been recently nerfed, but I think Annihilape's still really good. Especially like Scarfed Annihilape, I think will do this team a lot of good. Just as sort of like a Scarfed Final Gambit user, or just a really strong close combat and U-turn user. Which I think will be really beneficial for this team. Like, the more pivot you can get into this Raichu or into this Roromoon, the better. And if we scroll down, where are we? You can kind of see that, like, yeah, a decent amount of these guys can pivot. They also pivot into each other, which is really nice. For sort of being able to facilitate. Like, you can get stuck in like a really bad Volt turn combo with this team. So yeah, there's a lot to like. I think there's a few like typings that are obviously a bit sketchy. Like, I'm looking at Ghost here. It might mean you're forced to run AV Moon more often than you would like with this kind of team setup. You know, same with like Dark Resist. There's Moon and that's it. Like, the score can probably deal with most knockoff users, I would say. But still just annoying types to deal with, you know. And I think, like as well, like Ice, you know, on paper it doesn't seem too bad, but in reality, like, you resist a Ninetales, Glalie, and Colossal. Not the greatest, I would say. Like, it seems a bit sketchy. So despite this team having like extraordinarily strong defensive Pokemon, I think there's still probably a few situations where Kivs and Lucas are going to have to be really careful in how they bring in their defensive checks. Yeah, because there are a few typings that leave me a little bit worried for them. But like, overall, it's a strong team. It's really well constructed. I don't see this team having too much trouble getting into playoffs, just on the basis of, you know, what's been brought. Maybe it would be nice to have like a slightly better wisher for things like Ferrothorn and Colossal. But it's not the be all end all, really. Like, I don't think it's that important. So yeah. And they have lots of, you know, disruption as well. Oh yeah, that's the other thing with this stupid Raichu. Being able to Encore is, yeah, crazy. Like, yeah, this Pokemon's pretty illegal. It's crazy how much we've complexed on it and how good it still probably is. Or maybe it'll be really shit and I'll get proven wrong. But I'm not going to put money on that. Yeah, I think this team's solid. I think I like it more than Karp Me2's team. By just like a little bit, mainly just because I really like this core, and I think like defensively, you know, Dragagi's obviously broken, but I think it has like a little bit more of a holistic defensive profile. Offensively, this team, you know, if these two die somehow, then I guess like the damage is pretty lacking. You're kind of like, but these aren't bad as secondary damage dealers, I guess. But yeah, if anything was to stop this team doing well, I guess it would be like in matchups where these two are a bit more neutralized. Kivs and Lucas are going to have to play like a much more stally kind of match in that scenario. But this team could do it. It has a good score and a Ferrothon. It could stall things out if necessary. So I'm debating whether or not how I'd go about this. I think this is like much for muchness. I think that these top 5 teams are all really close right now. So I'll leave it like this for now. But I might swap it actually, because I think Kivs and Lucas have a couple more guys on this. Like, it kind of feels like a 9-1 team, whereas Connor and Cheese kind of feels a bit more like a 7-1 team. I guess Bob was pretty good actually. I shouldn't hate. That guy was pretty good for us when we used it last season or something. But yeah, I think overall this team has like a couple more angles just in terms of what ones it brings to each match. Whereas Connor and Cheese is a bit more like predictable. Like you're probably not bringing Drill without T-Tar, for example, or things like that. Alright, now I'm going to click the wrong button, and then I'm going to move into Moose and Slam's team, who have no removal. So I'm just going to bring that up right off the rip. They have no removal, which is, yeah, not great. This type chart looks really nice though. There's a lot going on. Yeah, they've drafted the brand new Mega Meganium, which I think is pretty solid of a pick overall. Like a lot of people obviously just look at it as, you know, Solar Beam, Weather Ball, Synthesis Bot, which is obviously like its main shtick. But defensively, it's got the same defensive profile as Mega Venusaur essentially. I think like very slightly less defenses, but in terms of like moveset, it can run a really good defensive moveset with like Dragon Tail and Aromatherapy and shit like that, knockoff and things. So I think it's very versatile first pick, which is really, really good. In terms of like grass, fire, water, you know, you've got these three here. Heatran's all reliable, Urshifu Rapid's quite strong, and it's a good source of physical damage for this team. I think in terms of like, actually yeah, offensively this team has a really good split of physical and special, because you've also got Aegislash as well who can do both. And then you've got dedicated physical in Meow and Urshifu, I guess Rhyperior. And then dedicated special in Meganium and Heatran and Kilowattrel. So I really like that. Not really sure why Politoed's here. It doesn't, like, I guess Politoed is good for like Specs, Kilowattrel, Thunder, and Hurricane. So fair enough. I guess having Rain's nice for Meganium, to be fair, because you get rid of its fire weakness, while it can still use Mega Soul and get the Sun boost on its abilities, which is pretty cool. It's just a little bit of an odd pick, right? Maybe it can benefit the Arrokuda though, who 63 base attack is pretty shit, but I suppose we'll see if Arrokuda makes an appearance. Momentum's a bit lacking, I would say. But in saying that, like if these three come to a battle, it's not too bad. But if they don't, then it could be a little bit tricky to pivot around for this team. Yeah, I think this team's pretty solid, both offensively and defensively. Like defensive AG is also like a really good check to a lot of things. Speed-wise, it's alright. I think Kilowattrel's not like the greatest pick in the world, and even Moose and Slam said they thought it got defog, so I'm curious how they would reevaluate their team if they realized it didn't. Meow's good, but yeah, there's a pretty big gap between it and Urshifu. And then there's a lot of teams that have like faster guys than this, so Meow kind of doesn't really want to be scarfed most times. Usually you'd prefer it to have some sort of, you know, something that boosts its damage. But I think it's going to be forced into scarfed to sort of navigate these trickier matchups in terms of speed tiers. Also wouldn't have been bad to see like a more prominent Wisher when you have a Heatran on the team, but like it's, you know, not the end of the world. And Meganium's pretty self-sufficient, which is nice. But yeah, like a few of the guys that'll be like tankier, such as AG or Rhyperior or Heatran, they're not going to have access to Wish support, which is a little bit unfortunate. Yeah, I think hazards are good too. I think that Moose and Slam should probably just opt into always trying to get as many hazards up on the opponent's side of the field as possible and force them to defog, because that's kind of their only choice. Yeah, overall, like, I like the team. The issue is, yeah, you have no removal, and that significantly hurts a team, I would say, in a draft format, much more than, say, like, on the ladder. Yeah, it's really hard to sort of rate this team highly when it has that as a glaring issue. It's just something they're going to have to play around every game that they really probably would prefer not to deal with. So like, yeah, I still think the team's good. I still probably... I don't know. Where do I want to put it? Do I like it more than Sweatybagels team? I feel like I do. But not by much. I feel like it probably sits like somewhere in here maybe. Yeah, I feel like that seems right. But again, like, that's the thing, I haven't encountered a bad team yet. So, yeah. Tough to say on that front. I'm now looking at this like whole setup and sort of thinking to myself, what do I do in terms of maybe I guess I would move these two up. Dark Horse is kind of like a really weird area now, but maybe I just like leave playoffs like this because I feel like these teams are all pretty close, and then there's like a bit of a gap between Dark Horse and there, so maybe I'll leave it at that. Yeah, not sure. Oh well. And then I think, was it 6? No. Where am I? There we go. Alright. So now to rate, yeah, mine and Pingu's team. So as I said, Me2 has mentioned that in his write-ups will be slotted in at 10th, which I think seems, yeah, relatively fair. I don't think this is like the best team that Pingu and I have ever drafted. I don't think it's the worst team that's ever been drafted either. I think it's fairly alright. Me personally, just like off the rip, I feel like I'd probably sit in Dark Horse because I think, oh, well, I put it in. I'll just put it now because, yeah, the thing's fucking up. Where was I? Yeah, because I think it has like a lot of offensive tools that are pretty scary to deal with. So sort of off the rip, you've got Mega Dragonite. I'm curious to see how good this thing actually is when we use it. On one hand, it's Dragonite without boots, which is like pretty sketchy. On the other hand, it doesn't have a single stat below 100 other than HP, and most of its stats are well above 100. So like it's literally just, I think in terms of all the picks in this draft, I think it has like just the most crazy stat profile. It's really tanky. It's really strong. It can Dragon Dance still if it wants to. It can run a lot of really hard-hitting special attacks. It's really versatile, and I think that versatility is obviously really beneficial in a draft setting, when you obviously know your opponent and can put on the 4 moves accordingly. It gets a lot of moves, so there's a lot to play with for us there. In terms of just like general removal, I think Tusk is a good fit with Dragonite. It can deal with like the steel types that Dragonite might otherwise struggle versus. And then say like Dragonite could deal, for example, with, you know, maybe like opposing grass types or things like that. So yeah, in terms of removal, it's quite nice to have. Our removal in general is like a little bit dodgy, I would say. Though this guy is kind of like the Landorus T of rapid spinning, so it's nice to have. And then secondary removal in Sizzle is not bad either. Could definitely do with some more, but Hatterene does sort of fulfill that role a little bit just by making it a little bit sketchier for teams to set up hazards versus this team. So I think that covers off things pretty nicely on that front. And then other offensive picks, there's Scolipede, which hasn't been drafted too much. It's another bug. We have 2 bugs on this team for some reason. But I think it fulfills a nice sort of like speed tier here. It's a nice grounded poison as well, to soak up toxic spikes, which I think is, you know, can be quite nice to have on most draft teams. And even though it's like not the strongest guy out the gates, I think it still has some good sweeping potential, which is something that teams will have to be on notice for. Zeraora up the top here as well gives us a fantastic speed tier. It outspeeds like everything prominent in the draft. Like I'm pretty sure no one's actually picked anything faster than Zeraora. So that's quite convenient to have, and just something that people need to watch out for. Yeah, because it just gives, I guess, the draft a little bit of an extra element of being able to check offensive threats, which is kind of the name of the game with all of these new megas that have been introduced. I think the main issues here probably lie defensively, though. You know, in terms of ice resists, Vaporeon's pretty solid, but again, if you run into Kyurem, which we do, things get obviously like a little bit trickier. As far as flying resists go, I think that while Pingu and I have drafted like the strongest flying types of any team, it's still something, you know, to be aware of. Same with rock typing. And fairy types is not as big of an issue, I'd say, but there's definitely some types here that you can kind of look at and be like, yeah, this is a little bit sketchy, and certainly some matchups will be difficult to navigate for this team. Yeah, making things a bit trickier than, you know, just being able to rock up to a match and have a check or a counter for everything. There'll have to be like a lot of double switches, a lot of pivoting around, which obviously places a lot of burden on being able to do well with this team. Yeah, in terms of like overall stat spread, like I think the damage split is pretty good. I think there's like obviously a bit of a bias towards physical attack, but I think that is kind of a bit of a misrepresentation, just because like Moltres, despite only having 100 special attack, I don't think anyone's going to look at you crazy if you claim Moltres Galar is a special threat. Same with Hatterene, like it's pretty strong out the gate, like it can kind of do the job if necessary. And yeah, in general, like even though Zeraora is obviously a little bit better physically, it can also run special sets if push comes to shove. I think that's kind of like one of the main things about this team that kind of gives it that little bit of X factor, which is why I put it in like the Dark Horse. Similar to Times' team, you just have a lot of Pokemon that can get shit done if necessary. Like you can set up with Bulk Up or Carmine Zeraora, you get Nasty Plot, you know, agility on the Moltres, you can run DD Dragonite, you can run Bulk Up Booster or Rapid Spin, something or other Tusk, you know, Swords Dance Sizzle, Swords Dance Scolipede. there's a lot of options to set up with this team. So if there's like an opportunity to do so, that's when this team kind of gets really unlocked and can start taking it to like some of the other matchups up here. In saying that though, you know, if you don't find that opportunity, trying to navigate some of the tricky matchups with this team, it's going to be really hard. So I think that's why it sort of doesn't quite fall into a sort of area up here. Where have I placed it? So it's like 8th, I think. I could definitely see it like, yeah, probably being there in 9th. I think that's probably fair. Me2 has it 10th apparently. It's probably like roughly where I would rate it. I think I like personally, obviously, you know, full bias, I like it more than a couple of the teams that I've put ahead of it. But I think looking like more objectively, you know, it probably falls somewhere in here. And again, like these names could probably be switched around and it wouldn't cause, you know, that much difference anyways. Yeah, cleric options are really good too, which I think is really important for a Dragonite without boots. I think that's one of the boons of this team. And momentum's quite nice as well. Like you've got these 5 that all have solid momentum. Furfrou has momentum. Always got to watch out for Furfrou. And then even like Baton Pass, like if we really want to run Baton Pass Hat or Pukabuku, then the option is there, which is not terrible to have. Some decent priority as well, so that's a nice little thing to have as well. Yeah, the only bad thing is that Times said that he liked Pingu and I's team, which probably means that we're going to go 0-6 and bomb out. So can't win them all. But yeah, final thoughts. I think that this tier list has gotten a little bit scuffed. Because obviously, if you look just at top 4 in playoffs, I only have 6 teams out of potential 8 that will actually go into playoffs. But like I think there is a decent gap between, say, like these 2 teams and the Dark Horse teams down here. I think these 2 are like a lot more holistically good, whereas these 3 are more offensive in nature. Don't have as good of like a defensive profile, at least at face value, which means that while they could probably like deal with all the other teams like offensively, it'll become a more uphill battle if something goes south, especially at the start of a battle. So that's why I think there's a bit of a delineation between here and there. And then honestly, between like the teams in like this top 4 area and Karp Me2 and Toph's team, I don't really think there's that much difference. Like I could put Karp Me2 up here, for example, but then I have 5 teams in top 4. It doesn't really make much sense logically. Same with like Connor and Cheetah's team. Like I'm actually not sure if it's like top 3 or if I should be putting, you know, Kivs Lucas, Karp Me2 above it. It's kind of semantics, I think, at that point. I think I definitely like this as like the top 5. For now, this is how I would put it. Just based on personal preference and a couple of things that I've just looked at over the course of this one. But like I could see it going either way. Like if you told me Karp Me2 end up getting top 4 and winning the season, I'd be like, yeah, that's fair enough. Doesn't surprise me. Good players that had the team for it. Like same with like a lot of these teams. There's a lot of good teams, which has made this pretty difficult. But yeah, I think that's all I probably have to say on this. Yeah, I think that's my final thoughts. So yeah, thanks for going through that. I'll try and chuck this up as soon as possible. It's a little bit delayed, sorry about that. But regardless, got the PRs done now. So yeah, hope you all enjoy it.